you guys are like really close friends with Ben from You, Me, and Everyone We Know. I'm wondering how that interviewing process like went because, obviously you guys are buddies and you've been through a lot together already. So you kind of know what he's been doing to an extent, but how was it to sit down and actually be like, tell me your story in full, but for, a huge audience compared to like, you guys just talking and hanging?
Honestly, Ben and I are really close. We talk all the time, but for his episode in particular, I guess I had to pull out my inner fanboy, which I tuck away whenever I'm around my musician friends, where I'm like, oh my God, I actually really admire the things that you do. Because I was a fan of Ben's before I was his friend. So I kind of just had to ask myself, what don't I know about this guy? Because I figured that if you were a fan who's going to listen to the episode, you probably remember everything. So his episode specifically focuses on what happened in 2011, April 20th, 2011, somewhat ironically, when all the other members of You, Me, and Everyone We Know quit the band all at once in like a very public way. And if you were a person who used like Property of Zach or Under the Gun or Alternative Press, whatever happens to be, you probably remember this day because it was like they put out an open statement where they were like, some things have come to light with Ben that has irreparably damaged the band. And so all of us quit all at once. And then Ben was like, the band didn't break up, it's just me. So we kind of talked about like what was happening in his life leading up to that point, because that was kind of a pivotal point in his life and his journey with recovery. But so it wasn't that weird because it was like the one chance I got to ask him a nerdy fanboy question, but still be his friend. I didn't have like, I always feel awkward being like, sometimes I'll be listening to his music and I'll text him and be like, what the hell does this mean? Like, I have that, like, I don't want to use it too often that he gets annoyed. There was also an advantage in that I know Ben's story better than a lot of people do because we talk about a lot of things personally. So even before we started, I was like, can we go here? And he was pretty open to it. So like we put out a clip today that kind of hints at some of the stuff that we talk about in the episode. But Laura had a completely different experience because she knows Ben as well. And we are in a group chat. We FaceTime every single week, but she doesn't know him as well as I do. So it was different for her, I believe.
Yeah, it was. And it was kind of like, because I started listening to Ben's music more after I knew Ben than before. So it's kind of like I'm discovering a different side of a friend I met through a friend. And hearing his story was just like, it really opens your eyes to find out something like that about someone you know. And you're like, that clicks and that makes more sense. And you suddenly like you have this intimacy. But at the same time, it's weird to hear someone you know talking candidly on a podcast. Like in that regard, when you're hearing like, all these other like people that you may idolize or whatever, and it's like, oh, that's my friend, and he literally texted me in the middle of this and we're talking about Marvel stuff, and now I've got to take that hat off and put on the listening from a complete outsider perspective. And that's sometimes it's hard to take that apart and really process that a little. But I think Ben's episode's a really, really powerful one and a really good one, and I think it's one of the ones I'm really looking the most forward to seeing what people think about it.
And Ben has a lot of Ben has gone through a lot of childhood trauma, which he's pretty open about, and he'll probably talk about it a lot on his upcoming record. A cheap plug right there for him. But I imagine for you, Laura, not to steal this interview for a second, that it is weird because I don't think that that's something that Laura knew about Ben as much. So it's like listening to two friends have a really personal conversation about something that you didn't know was a thing, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I don't think I'm supposed to be hearing this.
Yeah, you feel like a fly on the wall, and I'm like, oh, am I supposed to know this about him? And then like, or do I address this and say like, I'm sorry you went through this because now I know, but we didn't talk about it, and I found about it through like a third party thing, even though you put that third party thing. It's a weird, complicated feeling, but at the same time, I feel like I appreciate him more for it. I don't know. I hope he's not. I don't want him to hear that. That sounds weird. But I feel like I know him better and appreciate him more. And it's like, it almost feels one-sided in a weird way. It's like, maybe I need to put out maybe I just need to talk into a microphone for an hour and just email it to him and be like, here, we're even now. Sorry.
Just tell him your trauma, just like into a microphone.
You're like, hey, let's talk about my dead parents for a little while so you understand I'm a little crazy too, and it's cool. Like, we got this. I got you. I'm not judging.
Yeah, that is weird. Like when I'm talking to somebody, like we have Shannon from Godsmack on this season. It was a really cool get, but I don't know him. I don't know anybody that knows him that has told me that they know him. So when he tells me like a crazy story, I'm just like, well, that's wild, man. But when it's somebody that I know and I'm reading something and it's like a revelation that they have never told me, for starters, there's a part of me that gets jealous where I'm like, why haven't you ever told me that thing about you before? But then it's also like, it is a complicated like social situation of like, can I text them and now like ask them to talk about this horrific thing that you just talked about? Like we do a better job this season giving people some like slight trigger warnings because it does get dark in a couple of episodes, and Ben's deals with child abuse and things like that. So like that's a thing where it's like we talk about that. He and I have talked about it a lot. We bring it up in the episode. We give listeners a warning before it happens. But I can imagine for Laura being like a person who just knows Ben from like stupid FaceTimes with us is like, do I text him? And like
yeah, like do I find out when like anniversaries are and send a card now? Like I feel like a bad friend if I don't acknowledge and make him feel better about this, you know? But I think it's a really powerful and amazing a thing that people are able to share these stories, because a lot of these stories, especially this season, are extremely intimate for people, and like it's hard to put yourself out there for like folks who've never done that before and talk about parts of your life that have been very, very private in a very public way, and a very like you're bearing your soul, you're naked in front of everybody saying, I did these things, I fucked up. And that's a hard thing to do because people don't like to be self-critical. That's not anyone's first trait generally. And you know, I think a lot of these stories are really great. And for Ben to share the stuff he did, it's like that's stuff that most people repress and pretend never happened. And he's like, this happened to me. Let's talk about it. If you've been through it, I got your back. And I think that's a powerful thing, to be able to take your trauma and use it to help others, you know?